for our final session of EdCog 2020, our closing discussion panel with a topic of the challenges ahead for the fall term and beyond. And I asked people to just quickly jot down in the chat, things that they're most concerned about for the upcoming fall term. And we're obviously talking about something in this discussion panel that's very important to all of us. So some of the concerns: academic integrity. Will students be motivated? Can we create community in an online classroom? Will students have the skills necessary in this course for the next course that depends on the content? And as an instructor, separation of work and home. There's issues of students' ability to access information if they have poor internet, rapport. Lots of different topics are coming in. To lead this discussion, I'm very pleased to introduce Tony Bates. So Tony Bates has been thinking about online teaching and ed technology issues for a very long time. He's currently a senior advisor at the Chang School of Continuing Education at Ryerson University. He's also a research associate at Contact North and a board member of the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association. He has almost 50 years experience in using technology for teaching, starting in 1969 at the British Open University, where he became a full professor in educational media research. So we're going to begin with a brief overview from Tony on his thoughts about what's coming up for us in the fall term and possible permanent changes that might emerge out of this experiment that we've been thrust into in this global pandemic. Afterwards, I will introduce each of our panelists and I'll get their initial response. And then we will go through a few questions that I have planned out ahead of time. And then as time permits, happy to try to moderate as many questions that we have from our audience. Please use the Q&A button. That's a lot easier for me to organize and sort through questions. And we'll get to as many as we can. But let's start off with the vision ahead from Tony Bates.
Hello, everybody. I'll start by saying I don't envy any of you in the position you're in at the moment. A friend of mine said that just because you jump into the sea doesn't mean you know how to swim. Everybody's had a crash course in online learning since March. And I think there's lots of lessons you've probably learned. Some of you will have taken to it like a duck to water. Others will have found some things worked and some things didn't, and others would probably have drowned. I hope you're amongst those who've drowned. What we've seen over up to COVID-19 was a gradual increase in fully online learning to around about 10% of all university teaching in Canada is fully online. That's credit courses, not continuing education. And blended learning was growing a little faster, blended in the sense of slightly reduced face-to-face teaching, replaced by some online learning. What I see happening in the future is online learning, fully online, increasing to about 15–20%, partly because of lifelong learners and the fact that students coming out of high school, the demographics are fairly flat or in fact declining over the next few years, whereas people in the workforce will continually require coming back for more qualifications and so on, and that will drive the numbers going to online learning. But it's the blended learning one that really interests me, because our projections suggest that something like 75% of all teaching, again, the projections are more fuzzy the further out you go, but something like 5 to 10 years, 75% of all teaching will be a combination of face-to-face online. And some would argue it is already. My grandson was working on his computer at home when I went to see him, and I said, what are you doing? You're online? And he said, no, I'm doing physics and my professor is terrible. I just can't follow his lectures. But we got a rough idea of the topics he's talking about. So I go on to MIT OpenCourseWare and look at their lectures, because their lectures are much better than the ones I'm getting in class. So students are going online anyway. They're going online and looking up stuff. So I think blended learning is going to grow rapidly, and I think everybody's going to be using it soon. But there's lots of challenges with this. We've had best practices now in fully online learning. We've been doing it for 30 years. So we know what to do to make fully online learning work. It's just that most instructors don't know about the best practices. That's why I wrote a book called Teaching in a Digital Age, which actually looks at best practices in teaching both online and blended. But the real problem here is that we don't really know what the affordances are of face-to-face teaching. So, for instance, we know the limitations to some extent of online learning. It's very difficult in some of the STEM areas, etc., although even that's beginning to change with simulations and virtual reality. But what we need to know is what is best done on campus when students can do stuff online. If your students can look up good lectures on physics, why are you teaching them? Shouldn't you be doing something else, like asking them to critique or do activities based along the stuff, amongst the stuff that's already up on the internet? If we look at the affordances of face-to-face teaching, I have a simple formula. I say that everything can be taught just as well online as face-to-face, except, and then we need to identify clearly what those exceptions are. And what's happened, everybody thought at the beginning that face-to-face was always better than online learning, but the research shows that isn't so. We're finding more and more areas where teaching can be done just as well online as face-to-face. In fact, in most cases, it's more to do with the quality of the teaching in whichever mode it's in. So you can have bad online learning or good online learning. You can have bad face-to-face teaching and good face-to-face teaching. So the first issue is we have all this knowledge about how to teach online well, but many faculty don't have that. That's not their fault. They never have been asked to do it before, but nevertheless, there's a problem here. And secondly, the model we have for fully online learning is based really on a team approach using an instructional designer and a web designer, at least initially, with the faculty member doing their first online course to try to help them through with best practices. Now, that's all right when it's only 10% of the teaching. But if we're moving into blended learning and we're going up to, say, 75%, how do you scale that support up? Well, you just can't. You'd have such a big teaching and center for teaching and learning that you wouldn't be able to employ any faculty to teach. So how do we scale up? So that's another issue here. How do we scale up the knowledge and training that we have? The next issue for me too is these large lecture classes. We know that the students who like online learning best are more mature, older students. Works well with graduate students, it works well with third and fourth year university students. But first year students don't like online learning. That's not why they go to university. They're not going just for the teaching, they're going for all the other things as well. And yet, what we tended to do in the response to COVID-19 is to put those big, large lecture classes fully online. And we know from the research here that students' ability to focus for more than 20 minutes, half an hour, with an online video is very small. And so it's not a good way to teach. And this raises the biggest issue of all, and that is faculty development. I've written that I think the current faculty development model is broken. We wait till instructors are appointed and then we try to train them in teaching. There's two problems here. I don't want to get into a plane where the pilot is learning while he's flying me. And secondly, it's difficult to take people whose primary passion is their subject matter and get them to spend time learning how to teach. And I tried to do that at UBC. I tried to get the PhD programs to have at least one module on pedagogical training but that was impossible because of the way the system works. The supervisors didn't want their students taking 5 months off to do a course on teaching. They wanted them doing research, and the students didn't want to do it either. They wanted to get their PhD, wanted to do research. So we have a number of systemic problems here. And I don't have solutions to the systemic problem of how we get better faculty development, but I think we do have to have much better models. And so those are the challenges I see ahead for the fall term and beyond.
Thank you. Thanks you so much, Tony. So we have a discussion panel here that cuts across the different players that are involved in academia. And I'm going to introduce each speaker briefly, and perhaps each speaker, could you tell us about your role, and then maybe you could give some initial reactions to the vision that Tony presented and your own thoughts. And let's try to restrict this initially to 1 to 2 minutes. Let's begin with a frontline instructor, Laura Cole. So Laura, could you just introduce yourself, your role, and your reactions?
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Laura. I'm a business professor at Mohawk. And so we had to get online in March very quickly to help our students finish out the semester. And so I was relating so much to Tony's comments with the blended learning and seeing, how that's going to be increasing and what we can do with that. I'm really curious, with our panel, how we can bring in a lot of the stuff we've heard today to make that engaging for the students. And Tony, I agree, you've got great online teaching and you have poor online teaching, and the same we do in our classrooms. So a lot of our methodologies, our thinking is similar. We have to figure out then how to translate it into online.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Next, we have an educational developer. So we'll next hear from Joanne Kehoe.
Hi, everyone. I'm currently up north, hoping that the internet connection is working and you can hear me okay. Kind of exemplifying one of my biggest concerns is around access to education with this focus on synchronous delivery. So a lot of what Tony has said, and I recommend his reading, the recent blog posts and book, of course, to the faculty that we're arranging our professional development for, which we're in the thick of it, of course. So I guess just really the point that kind of resonated with me was, we do have a lot of years of online teaching behind us, a lot of things that we've discovered and know what works well. I mean, I'm at McMaster, unfortunately, we don't have a strong background in online courses. So there's a handful of online courses in each faculty, maybe one online program, but more so lots of online courses within continuing ed, so trying to learn from those experiences. But we're kind of being thrust into this online space without having a lot of that, background knowledge and instructional design support at the university, which we've been lucky and fortunate with this current shift to have that support now. So we do have a lot of new staff on board helping us get these faculty development sessions and training and the typical things that all the universities and colleges are doing right now, all these how to teach online courses. But what I really found, though, what I've seen is there's a tremendous amount of focus on synchronous delivery, which I'm just concerned with the challenges ahead of the fall term, I think are going to be from both educators and learners, but concerned from the learners' perspective that access will be difficult, particularly with international students and students who don't have robust internet access readily available. So we're really trying to coach that asynchronous approach, learner-focused approach as much as possible. I think, yes, online can be as good or better than face-to-face if you do it right. That's
Okay.
just initial thoughts. Yeah.
Thanks, Joanne. We also have on our panel today a real-life student. So let's hear from Fawziyah. So could you tell us a little bit about your role and your initial thoughts?
Sure. So I'm the Vice President of Education for the McMaster Students Union. So deal a lot with hearing student concerns and advocating for those concerns. I think the portfolio has changed, of course, a lot this year with COVID and just the amount of, rightfully so, I guess, anxieties that students are feeling kind of coming out of that second semester and what that looks like with online learning and what that could look like for the fall moving forward. I really like Tony's comment about getting into the plane while the pilot is learning to fly. I think that's something that students are worried about. I guess in terms of a conversation of, on the one hand, professors who are well versed in their subject matter, as Tony mentioned, but are maybe adjusting, number one, to even having to reflect on their teaching and their teaching method, and at the same time coming to terms with online and kind of the difficulties around figuring out technology. So I think something that's going to be really important moving into the fall, and something that students are thinking about, I'm sure a lot of professors are thinking about, is how to keep students engaged, how to ensure that it actually becomes a beneficial process for students, and students are leaving hopefully not at the end of the semester thinking, okay, that was the worst thing, nothing resonated with me, I don't remember anything. Hopefully students find that, maybe I wasn't expecting to enjoy an online semester. Particularly, I think it was mentioned by a few panelists, first years may have that different experience. They're not being able to be in residence, aren't able to kind of acclimate to being around their peers, like moving into this post-secondary environment, but hopefully students are able to leave engaged, with online teaching being beneficial for them.
Okay. And then finally, so, when you're at an in-person conference and you have these hallway discussions, and then you rope people into doing things, that's exactly what happened online. So I was having a virtual lunch with Victor Benassi, and I thought, you know what? We should get you to be on the closing discussion panel. So our final late addition is Victor Benassi. So could you tell us about your role and your initial thoughts?
Hello, everybody. Victor Benassi. I'm from the University of New Hampshire in the United States, and I have been a longtime professor of psychology, a director of a teaching and learning center for about 12 years, for maybe 8 years, a vice provost for undergraduate education. And relative to some of your comments, Tony, one of the roles that I had over maybe 25 years of that period was that I directed in the psychology department at UNH a doctoral program that actually focused on preparing doctoral students for not only their research roles, but also as teachers of psychology. It's one of probably the first such program, and is still around. And so a lot of experience with faculty over the years. Relative to your point, Tony, my experience with many faculty and new teachers especially is they think of their academic courses that they're teaching in terms of two components. There's what happens in class, and there's what happens outside. And that the relative attention that is given to those two components is the focus is on what happens in class. What am I going to do with my lectures? What bells and whistles am I going to have? How am I going to create this and that? And then I'll give students homework assignments. I'll tell them to watch some videos. I'll tell them to read some chapters to solve some problems. But there's been, in my experience, relatively little concern about the totality of the course design. And I think that one of the benefits of this COVID crisis is that it's forcing faculty to begin to think about their courses in totality. One last sentence, and that is, at UNH, we've had these programs we call Talk About Teaching, and they've been very well attended by a very small minority, but good numbers of faculty teaching. This summer, the new director, Catherine Overson, is running maybe 15 or 20 of these things. I think there are over 3,000 registrations that have occurred because of crisis, this crisis is the parent of invention and innovation, maybe.
Okay, Tony, before we move on to our questions, maybe if you'd like to respond to any of what you've heard so far, I'll give you a chance right now.
Well, could I respond to a couple of the chat comments?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Good comment about should undergraduate students receive coaching or training. I said, yes, I think they should. For every online course I've offered, I've always had a kind of pre-course module for students on studying online, because many of them haven't studied online before. And even if they have, they may not have had guidance on how to do that. So very simple things like make sure you do your work every week. Don't let it build up till the end of the year. That would apply obviously to face-to-face courses, but it's a particular problem with online learning. I usually have a bio page to get to know students, get students to post a bio before the course starts. I ask them if I can share that with the other students to try to build some kind of sense of community. So I have a set of guidelines. I also put very clearly what my expectations are online, what the assessments are, and what I expect students to do during the course to get good grades in their assessment. So I try to set them up before they start, particularly if they're novice online learning students.
Okay. So here is a first question for our panel. So maybe I'll pose this question to Joanne first. Given the challenges of blended and online learning, should university instructors require qualifications in teaching as well as research? So maybe we'll begin with Joanne, and then other panelists can join in if they would like.
Sure. Well, I just, I work at a teaching and learning center, so of course I'm going to say yes. Every faculty member should avail, whether it's a requirement or not. I don't know whether I'd expect that, but definitely encourage that people participate in all of the training sessions that we offer as far as faculty development goes. And I think, if anything, that is one benefit of what we've been going through, is it has proven the value of having a teaching and learning center at a post-secondary institution. So I definitely think that for each faculty member who are facing this current challenge, having that sort of coached approach, that instructional design, that good, I loved what Victor's point was about how one of the benefits of the good things that have come out of this is having better course design. So having that kind of instructional design, backwards design, that learning outcomes focused design process would be a wonderful thing to have every faculty member go through with their teaching and learning center.
So one of the points that was raised in my lunchtime conversation with Victor was that he mentioned that the University of Hampshire, the Center for Teaching and Learning, it's busier than ever, but it's mainly the same people that come to the workshops. So I guess maybe, Victor, you could comment on this too. What do you think about the required part of this question as opposed to opting in?
Yeah, just to say what I was saying at lunch was that heretofore it's been the choir. There was, big numbers, but the same people. What's happened over the summer because of the crisis is other people are showing up. I mean, that's one of the, I think, the beneficial things is going. I mean, I know in a number of countries in Europe and in Great Britain, and I have not followed this, maybe Tony, you've been following this, is that in the early part of this century, there were in many countries requirements of new faculty who were hired at public universities for teaching. That is, they had a period of time to get a qualification in teaching. I don't know if that's still going on, or I haven't followed it for a while.
I think it's dropped. They set up an institute for awarding accreditation in the United Kingdom. And I remember somebody coming over and talking to us at UBC about this. Unfortunately, I think that it was hard for it to continue. Change of government, change of personnel, and then it gradually died.
Yeah,
it's really hard to force faculty to do anything, to be honest. So it would be much better if it was voluntary rather than required. But I think we could set the expectation that people should do it without having to force them to do it. Because some professors aren't really interested in teaching at all. If they could get away without teaching, they'd be very happy to do it. And maybe they're better out of the classroom.
If I could just comment as well, I think there is an interest or a thirst, at least among some instructors, to get effective training and qualifications. And I just want to highlight one program that we have launched at McMaster University. It's called the McCall-McBain I forgot the whole name. It's a teaching and training program aimed at postdocs. So in the Faculty of Science, postdocs apply to be in this program, and then for an entire year, they engage in workshops, training, research, all about leadership and becoming an effective teacher and learning the pedagogy. And what makes it a reality, and this is the key, is that you have to have institutional buy-in. So if you're a postdoc supervisor, you might think, yeah, it'd be great if my postdoc once a week went and got this training and this experience. It would make them a better researcher, it would make them more marketable, but I'm paying them to be in the lab. So the solution to that is 20% of the postdocs, for the postdocs in this program, 20% of their time is bought out so that they can fully participate in this program. So it's a win-win situation for the research supervisor as well as the postdoc. And I think it takes that type of commitment, like skin in the game, to really make something like this happen.
Joe, I'm happy to jump in on that quickly too, Joe, from a college perspective. We do, as soon as you're full-time faculty, you're asked to go through training as well. And at Mohawk, the Center for Teaching and Learning, Kathy might actually be on the call with us right now. All the full-time faculty go through training. And so when I'm reading the question here, when it says qualifications in teaching, I'm not sure we necessarily mean teachers college, for example, but definitely some teaching support or some training through the Center for Teaching and Learning to support just how to even have a classroom discussion and different types of methodologies, like the great stuff we learn right here in these conferences that oftentimes are, it's this, the Center for Teaching and Learning are here on these conferences, and then they can then take that information and support it with the faculty. But I'm also a corporate trainer, and so I have the, trained in facilitation is also a great method and a great strategy to have. And so when we're thinking about what are those types of qualifications, university professors might need, we can think beyond just teaching and think about what other stuff the Center for Teaching and Learning could provide for them. And I think right now there is definitely that thirst for it, as Victor was noticing. So it's a great time to be asking this question and creating good resources.
We can also get a response from Fawziyah. So when I was an undergraduate student, I think I just kind of assumed that professors received training on how to be a teacher. After all, they're a professor. Like, why wouldn't they? So what are the student expectations for the instructors that are in front of them?
For sure. Even just like speaking from my own perspective, for a very long time in my undergrad, I assumed that professors also received, I guess, some sort of formal teaching qualification. It wasn't until I think actually my fourth year when I was having a conversation with someone at MacPherson who kind of let me know that actually a lot of it is like the research component, and most like teaching workshops and I guess like courses or things that could formalize teaching are voluntary. And that was just really surprising, but I think a little bit eye-opening because you see, I guess, a vast discrepancy. And there are some professors who deliver information beautifully. It's just absolutely wonderful. And there's some professors who fall through just a little bit. And I think something that as a student and reflecting back on it, I guess is important to know, like in a perfect world, many years of research would transfer into amazing delivery. But sometimes you'll see that discrepancy is there. So I think, yeah, it would be wonderful. Of course, there's obviously always the issue of requiring folks who may not be interested in sitting through a course or a workshop on teaching, and maybe them not getting the benefit that people would be hoping for from the formalized or the qualifications being put out. But I think it would be wonderful if most professors were able to attain some sort of qualification in teaching. I think just that delivery of teaching, even if it's something that shows professors things that students enjoy, ways that students can actually be engaged, how students actually can retain the information that's being presented, could make a really big difference in kind of the end result of a course. and how students actually feel about it in terms of what they feel like they've learned and retained. So yeah, I think it would be good.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the way that I pitch this to new faculty members that I talk to is that, so faculty members are typically evaluated, some part of for research, some part for teaching, and some part for service, and whatever percentage that might be. And I told them, imagine you had no training at all in research and you were evaluated for 40% of your performance on your research. And every day you thought, oh man, I just hate research. I can't believe I got to go in the lab and collect data and then write papers. It would be a miserable existence. Similarly, in a typical breakup, 40% of your evaluation is based on your teaching. And this could be the worst part of your life where every day you think, oh my God, I got to be in the classroom. I got to give this lecture again. Or with some training, with preparation, with thoughtful insight, this could be the highlight of your day. And I tell you, when you give an amazing lecture and students are asking questions and the room is buzzing, it gives you a high. It makes you a better researcher. It makes you a better academic. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. As a result of your emergency remote teaching, what benefit aspects of online learning will you retain once campus teaching resumes? Laura, do you mind if you were thrust into this experiment in March? Maybe you can tell us from your perspective, what elements are you going to keep permanently?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, we were definitely thrust into it in March. We had about 4 days to get the last half of our semester online and get going. And so what has been actually very interesting, and we've already mentioned it a couple times, but it's worth repeating, is the time of reflection and having to sit back and ask, okay, how am I teaching these concepts, and what do I actually want my students to take away from this? Because we know that, we can't have these 3-hour online lectures. It's pared down, and we have shorter time if we're doing, the face-to-face live Zooms. It's going to be shorter than what we normally have. So, what do I really want to be able to share with my students, and what do I really want my students to be doing with this information after the lesson? And it's caused me to really pause and reflect on what I'm including in my lectures, how I'm sharing the information, and that is definitely something I'm going to retain is that constant reflection after each lecture. And I'm sure we all do that as professors. I know I do. After a lecture, I'm thinking, oh, I could have done that differently. I'll do it differently next time, and I'll debrief and add a couple things in. But in this case, it's really about wanting to figure out how is that all translating online, and how is it showing up for the students. And I'm loving that. We had a great end of the semester, I have to say. And one of the questions we were seeing in the chat is about engagement. And yeah, that was a concern. I didn't see the level of engagement that I typically do, and that was definitely a concern. But the students that were there, it was a great ending. It worked out as best we could. So the constant reflection and the constant changing and adapting of the material, and not just relying on the lecture you've done for 3 years and keep doing it, changing it and updating.
Thank you. Maybe we'll go to Fawziyah and then Tony after that. So Fawziyah, from your perspective as a student, you experienced some of the rapid changes that happened to take place in March. Some of it was probably good, some of it was bad. As we move into the fall and beyond, are there any elements of this experiment you think that we should keep for future teaching?
For sure. Something personally that I really enjoyed, I found that with the move to online, there was a bigger emphasis from a lot of professors to include material outside of textbook material and external material through reading resources, just various, I don't want to say videos, but I guess just various other mediums of gaining information that were creative, interesting, increased access to documentaries, increased access to I remember with one history course, there was an interactive map. I guess just a lot of various resources that went away from the traditional methods of just incorporating lengthy, I guess, like excerpts from chapters. And I think that, I don't know, it was refreshing, it was engaging. It was something that I think was nice, and something, because I'm a political science major, so it's been a lot of reading for 4 years. And I think every so often having a bit of a change, or even just like incorporating knowledge that doesn't directly come from the textbook that's been used for a few years, or that comes from like your professor, is always a little bit interesting. So yeah, hopefully that's something that can be retained.
Okay. And then Tony, what are your thoughts on what do you think will be retained as a permanent change to these experiments we're running?
Well, I hope that, as Victor said, that we'll look more carefully at the overall design of a course and where lectures fit into that, rather than seeing the lecture as the organizing structure of the course. Lectures, to me, are just one thing that students need, but they also need lots of other things. I like what Fawziyah said about the wide range of resources out there on the internet now that students can use. So I think we should be sending students out to do research, to find stuff. I mean, if you look at a lecture, we do all the hard work. If the professor decides what topics to be taught, does the research on the topic, organizes the structure of the lecture, and so on. Why don't we try to turn that over to the students now that everything's out there? So give them a topic, give them some guidelines, give them some criteria, and get students to pull the stuff together, for instance, because they can do that online now. Bring it back into class and discuss that in class, for instance. So I would like to see students being much more active, and online learning being the way they do their activities after outside of the classroom. And that then means asking good questions about what's the best way to use classroom time then. I like Queen's University's active classrooms. I don't know if you've seen those, but their students sit are around tables. Each table, you can plug your computer in. Each table has a screen. So you can teach the class as a whole. You can teach it in small subgroups, and students can even go out and do some private study in a chorale and come back into the group. So again, online learning opens a lot of opportunities for making learning more active.
Okay. I'm going to tie this into a question that we have online here. So it has to do with potentially individual differences. Maybe you even consider the different levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the university. So Ruth Silverman from Simon Fraser University says that she teaches a program for students who would otherwise be required to withdraw from the university. We tried to emphasize connection and support when we moved it to online in the summer, and will continue into the fall. It's been a better experience for a very small class with just 4 students, but in our 20+ student classes, students are routinely falling through the cracks. Tony, would you put this sort of program, especially if a small class is not possible, into the category of it can't be done effectively online?
I'm a great online advocate, and I'm always reluctant to say, well, no, we can't do this online. But there are definitely things that are very difficult to do online. Most things you can do online if you've got enough time and money. So even in the STEM areas, if you've got time to build simulations and virtual labs and so on, then yes, but that they take time and they're expensive to do. So I don't think you should force everything online if it doesn't fit, especially if you've got the opportunity to have in-class teaching. So there's 2 elements here. One is the academic element. You know, this subject matter demands this kind of activity for it to work and for students to really learn and understand. And again, I think you need to assess face-to-face and online as to which they do best. But the second is the students themselves and what they're looking for. And they're often looking for that kind of social experience of other younger people and the cultural side of a university beyond the academic subjects, the sports and so on. So, and I think that's really important, and I would hate to see that being lost because everything's gone online. My real worry is governments will start saying, well, wait a minute, why do we have all these expensive buildings if online learning is so successful? And I think there are good answers to that.
All right. So Victor, maybe I could get you to join us in here on this question. What are your thoughts on this question?
I think that one of the big benefits that can come out of what's going on here is that based on the science of learning work, much of which has been talked about over the last 2 days here, and much of that work, some of that work is being done by people participating in this conference, is extremely applicable to the out-of-class environment. And it turns out, not for all areas, and some areas haven't been investigated yet, but I know in terms of our own teaching and learning center, the work that has gone on and other places, the students who benefit most by appropriate application of science of learning principles in the activities that students do outside of class actually benefits the students that would benefit the most, being students that had not been doing as well, students who have a history of poor academic performance. That is what happens with a lot of the instructional environment is there's a one way that it's done, and that one way maybe is beneficial for the middle of the road, but not for the lowest performing students. In some of our work, we've found that, for example, having students do practice quizzing, the retrieval effect, self-explanation, and other science of learning principles, that they actually benefit the students, say, in the first part of the course that we're doing the worst, that when we implement these out-of-class activities, in other words, not just say, go and read your book or go and do this, what we would do is we give them an assignment with like a quizzing effect on Monday, and then we make them do it again on Wednesday, and we make them do it again on Friday, and we interleave everything together. We give them a small amount of participation credit, and we sometimes see dramatic benefits. So I think, to the Q2 there on the screen, that one of the benefits that could come out of this, and I think, for those of us here who are teaching and learning center people, we really need to get our science of learning game on. That's what I think.
Thank you, Victor. So we're going to move on to our final question. So one of the casualties, at least for the upcoming fall term in higher education, is the very large lecture classroom gathering. And maybe this is a chance for us to rethink the whole teaching model in university. So the question I have for the panelists is, should we get rid of very large lecture classes altogether? And maybe we could start again, with Fawziyah. From your perspective as a student, what are your thoughts on this question? The very units of what I think people typically think of a university course.
So I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think it depends on whether the faculty. I think it depends on student personal preference. I know that in my early years of university, I came to start to enjoy, in my later years, I came to start to enjoy smaller classrooms, and I guess having more personal conversations with the professor, being able to dive, I guess, a little bit more deeper in the material. I think in my first year, I really enjoyed large lectures because I felt like when you don't really know what's going on, you feel like you can just come to class, sit and absorb the knowledge and then go home and work on your work. But I know that that's something that a lot of students don't enjoy. Number one, because you're not able to have too many close interactions with peers. You're not able to have that close interaction with professors. And I think with a 300 plus classroom, it's very daunting to want to come forward and speak to your professor at office hours because you were probably 50 rows away from them for multiple weeks. So I think this is something that, there are benefits to large lectures for some students where, you kind of just want to get the material and see what you can do with it on your own in the library or at home. But I think for students that prefer that person-to-person interaction, prefer smaller interactions with their peers to learn, moving away from large lectures would be something that's beneficial. So I don't know if I have a full umbrella answer. I do think that it varies, but I do see kind of the pros and cons to large lecture halls.
Okay, I'll give all of our panelists an opportunity to address this question. Laura, I think you're having some connection problems, but if you can, you're an instructor. You teach large lecture classes. Would you want to give that up?
I've been thinking about this, Joe, since you posed the question, and my initial response was, yeah, let's get rid of the large lectures and let's see some smaller classes, because I do both. I'll teach a large lecture room of first year, and then I also teach third and fourth year smaller classes, like say 40 students. And they are marked differences, and I have different teaching styles for both. I have different connections and relationships with the students in both. And, but boy, I'm having a hard time leaning on which side I prefer. There is something about that large lecture room and having that big discussion, but I know that our student body is changing, and the hopes of our students are changing. And as we were just hearing, not everyone is cut out for those large rooms. Is there a way to do it differently? We do have the tutorials, so that helps with that. But boy, I don't know, Joe. I like both. I don't have a problem teaching in both spaces. But I'll say in a large lecture room, I definitely make the effort of trying to get to know my students, and it's hard to do. And I usually get to know the first, 5 rows of students, and everyone who sits, 6 rows and up, I don't know them. I move around the room a lot, even.
Oh, I think your audio's cut out, Laura. Okay, but I think we got the essence of what you're saying there. If I were answering this question myself, I would never want to get rid of the lecture. In fact, I fought hard to make sure there was an in-class lecture component in my introductory psychology course, so it's fully blended. And for me, I think when you have a blended course where you have all the primary course content delivered online in a self-paced format, it really opens up the opportunities for your class time to effectively be different. So I think there's an energy that's in the actual lecture hall. I lecture to 600 people at once, and it's an exciting environment. Part of it is because it's live. Anything could happen. When I do a demonstration, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. How will I react to this? How will I explain this demonstration? Students love volunteering for different demonstrations and examples that I give in class. One of the fun things that I do when we're talking about evolutionary psychology, and they've learned about game theory and the prisoner's dilemma. I start the lecture off. I put the prisoner's dilemma on 2 students on opposite sides of the lecture hall. I bring them up, I show them an envelope, and then I say, inside this envelope is 10 iClicker bonus points. Let's figure out what we're going to do with them. And the students have 2 cards, share or steal. And they have to make a decision on the spot of what they're going to do. And there's a class of 600 people shouting advice. They're seeing the excitement. They're seeing the tension. They're seeing, because the 2 students will say to each other, yeah, I guess we should split, right? That's the right thing to do. And you could see the conflict in their faces. And that's something that's, you could hear about it. You could see a video of it, but to actually be there and experience that conflict and that tension and seeing what will happen, I think is very exciting. So for me personally, I would always prefer to have in-class components to complement the online learning experience. Happy for any of the other panelists to jump in with their thoughts on this.
I would just add Michelle's presentation yesterday morning on the introductory psychology course at McMaster is exactly what I was referring to before, where it's a fully integrated approach. I mean, she talked about the lecture, She talked about what students do outside of class and the activities and the weekly seminar, or whatever, the meeting with the TAs and so on. That's a perfectly good example. Just one other point, that is that at universities like the University of New Hampshire, it would be very difficult to eliminate large enrollment classes, because that means there need to be a lot more smaller classes, which means there need to be more faculty. And some of us were talking earlier today in the United States and elsewhere, there are a lot of portions of higher education are really doing very poorly. And universities and colleges, particularly small colleges, are shutting down right and left. And the COVID crisis is just making that worse. So I don't see it in the cards, but it's about how you do it, Joe. That's what you're talking about. It's how you do it.
Joanne or Tony, please feel free to add your comment.
I was just going to add, I'd rather see getting rid of mandatory in-person attendance for very large lecture classes, maybe as an option. So I like, the kind of giving students that flexibility about how they engage, and that kind of high flex model that we're seeing a lot of progress and emphasis on in the States, and particularly that students can either engage by going into class in person or engage by watching synchronously from home or wherever, or watch asynchronously afterwards. So I think that may be a way to move forward rather than getting rid of the very large lecture. I think it's more about the support for the students and the flexibility of choice that they have.
Okay. How about you, Tony?
Well, I hope that instructors' experience from going online in the COVID-19 crisis response, I hope they learn that lectures are just one tool in an armory of tools, and should not see it necessarily as the main organizing structure of a course. So, for instance, I think there will be great value in having an introductory course for all the students in a large class and so on, and maybe a wind-up lecture, maybe one in the middle, so where have we got to in the course, where are we going, but maybe have lots of other activities and online work and small groups coming into campus, maybe self-regulated groups, so you don't necessarily have to have a structure, an instructor there, but they've got very clear guidelines of what they should be doing when they come on campus together and so on. So it's seen as one tool in the box, that's fine. My worry is when students in their first year are getting nothing but day after day of very large lecture classes. And as Fawziyah says, it depends on the instructor immensely. Some, like yourself, are brilliant at doing it, but others are not. And it's really tough on the students when they get a bad instructor like that. And if it's the only thing in the course, then the whole course suffers. Whereas if it's just one tool, maybe as another panelist said, if you have a hybrid model, where a high flex model where students can choose, they can come to lectures, they can watch it online if they want to, if they can come for some of the lectures and not all of them, because there's alternatives ways of doing it, then I think that will be much better. And that will probably reduce the size of the lectures anyway by giving students choices of doing it other ways. So you'd have some in class and some just following it streamed and not necessarily live, for instance. So, but I think particularly next semester, it's a very bad idea to have 600 people locked into a room for an hour.
So if a hammer is the only tool that you have, everything starts looking like a very large lecture hall.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, we have a couple more. We have time for a couple more questions from our audience. So as we go into the fall semester, it is going to be an interesting new experiment. Do you think that there might be a cohort effect where when we go back to some sort of normal, back to face-to-face learning, there's going to be a large group of students who have learned in this new purely online environment, and then they have to land back into a classroom with back to face-to-face teaching, do you think there might be challenges for this cohort?
Is that a question to us all, Joe?
Yeah. Well, Tony, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
I have two grandsons, both of whom decided to take a gap year. Not on my advice. They came to that decision entirely on their own. I think it's really tough for students this coming year. I mean, it was tough for the ones in March to the end of the year, but to be honest, you know, it's always a more flexible time of the year for students anyway, from April onwards. But coming in September as a 18-year-old into this kind of environment, I think is very, very difficult for students. They have my utmost sympathy.
Okay, so maybe in closing we could do this. I'd like each of the panelists to think of one piece of advice to give to instructors for this fall semester. What would that one piece of advice be? Let's see. I feel like I'm cold calling here, but maybe we could start off with our instructional designer, Joanne, and then we'll go to Fawziyah, Victor, Laura, and then we'll close with Tony. Your one final piece of advice to instructors for the fall semester.
This is so hard. I can't give one. But yeah,
you're my best student. That's why I called on you.
I was thinking, I guess, I mean, I'd really love the asynchronous approach, but I would probably more emphasize, because I'm thinking there would be a real challenge with sessional instructors coming in late to the game in August, and just looking to what has already been developed by other. I'm going to pump the open educational resources, because I think there are some wonderful, high quality resources that you can integrate into your teaching. So that would be my one piece of advice. And librarians can help with that, not just teaching and learning centers. So.
Okay, so you're not alone. Yeah. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Okay. Fawziyah?
I think my piece of advice would be an online course construction shouldn't just be the in-person one, but online. It shouldn't just be the exact same syllabus and the exact same format, same lecture, calendar, and just thrown online. I think for a few reasons, obviously there's going to be, in moving a course from an in-person format to an online format, just things that need to change along the way. But I think also from a student perspective, it's important to factor in that, you know, maybe some professors might be thinking, well, they're home all the time, like they can write maybe even another essay over the course of a semester. But I think even factoring in, I think Joanne brought this up earlier on in the panel, but you know, students have differential access to Wi-Fi. Students may not have the same home lives. Maybe people don't have like the ability to study quietly for multiple hours. There's a lot of factors to factor in. So I think just, yeah, that would be my one piece of advice. Consider what students are going through. Don't do the direct in-person to online and it's all done. Like really reflect on your course, how it can be best tailored to an online environment, and specifically the environment of like the crisis of COVID-19.
So think empathetically from a student's perspective. And I'm feeling big on analogies here, but a really great analogy I heard was when stage plays, when movies first came about, I think the model that people had was a stage play. And they thought, well, let's just take a stage play and then film it. But a movie is a different genre. It feels different. Just simply translating a play and then filming it is not quite the same thing. So thinking thoughtfully and creatively about how you're going to transform that in-person class to online, it's going to take some work. All right. Victor?
I think that thinking about your course in its entirety, the big picture, the integrated part, is what we should be focusing on between now and the beginning of the fall term. And I would recommend that you make somebody in your teaching and learning center your best friend. And if you don't have a teaching and learning center, I would recommend that you go to LD Fink's website on integrated course design. And I think you'll get a good picture of the kind of thing that I've been talking about.
Could you add that to the chat and maybe to the hashtag EdCog 2020?
Okay.
Thanks so much, Victor. And Tony, final comments.
Students are going to feel isolated and alone if they're working from home. So my advice to the faculty would be communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate in as many ways as you can to students as a whole and to students individually. For instance, have a course blog post where you chat about your interests. Give students blog posts so they can chat about the course, a course blog post. Put students into online collaborative learning groups through the discussion forums on the LMS and participate in those discussions, not responding to every comment, but at least once a week appearing with some meaningful comment within the discussion forums. So find as many ways as possible as you can to communicate online with students.
Thank you so much, Tony, and to all of our panelists for your thoughtful views as we all think about the challenges ahead for the fall term and beyond. I also want to thank all of our speakers and workshop leaders for their thought-provoking presentations that I hope will seed conversations that will bring together educators, researchers, and policymakers as all of us strive to discover evidence-based practices in education. And I think there's a lot to process as we think ahead to the fall term and beyond. And hopefully we all feel energized moving forward, or at the very least, we have a sense of the task ahead of us. I'm always happy and relieved to see this meeting run smoothly, especially since we shifted to completely online. I couldn't sleep the night before, the first day, just worrying that there would be technology problems, but generally things have run pretty smoothly. So for this, I have to thank all of our volunteers, our organization committee, Michelle Cadieux, Connie Imbo, Paulina Redzovska, pretty close, right? Paulina RZ, Irina, all the people that work behind the scenes, Christine. And I want to thank all of you for attending and joining us in this conference experiment. And one of the results that are emerging out of this is that I think it works. So as we move ahead to think about EdCog 2021, first of all, we're going to expand by a day, so please do mark this date. We are also going to move to a high flex model of conferences. So we've already been streaming day 2 for a few years now, and that audience has been growing. And so we're hoping to move back to an in-person conference next year with workshops, all the different events. But we're also planning to have a selection of the workshops be exclusively online. So if you're based in Germany, you maybe don't have to fly all the way here. You could attend and get the entire experience of the day 1, day 2, completely online. But if you are local or you can manage to get here, please join us to benefit everything in person and have all our hallway discussions. So I hope you've been inspired by this meeting. I hope you can also take a moment to think about a change you plan to make in your teaching for the upcoming year, and then please share it with all of us on Twitter at #EdCog2020. Safe travels back to your kitchen, and I hope to see you next year at EdCog 2021, virtually or in person. Thank you very much.